Hello and welcome to AWS Security Live. My name's Rob Hale. I lead AWS's security business, a partner business in EMEA. We are Security Live. We're a live podcast. We broadcast every 2 weeks, 8 a.m. PST if you're on the west coast of the US. If you're in Europe, it's currently 5 o'clock. So welcome to all of our regular viewers. As ever, it's not just a host on Security Live. We are joined today by an amazing partner. So we have Alex Bovee from C1, so the CEO and co-founder of C1, in fact. Alex, welcome to Security Live.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure. And whereabouts are you in the world?
I'm in Portland, Oregon at the moment.
Nice. Awesome. And it's in Europe, we have a heat wave at the moment, so we're like 30 and upwards temperature. So hopefully it's not raining in Portland because it's boring.
Yeah, well, for better or worse, usually the rain gets out of the way during the winter. But I did hear that you guys were having a heat wave in Europe, and it's pretty brutal. I actually love heat and I love hot weather, so I would take that in a heartbeat out here in Portland. But it's been a little bit dreary.
We love heat as long as we're on holiday and enjoying the heat. But but we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about all things security, and we do that to solve for customer security challenges. So I'm really interested in what C1 does, but also from two areas. One is from an agentic security perspective. What's C1 actually doing, because you're an agentic company, and two, then what are you doing for customers? So could you give us a bit of an overview about yourself and C1 and how you came to be and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a quick intro to myself, I guess. So I've been in the security ecosystem for maybe 15 plus years at this point. Started in mobile security, spent a lot of time in identity. Sort of fell into it, but that's really where I think I cut my teeth in security, and spent a lot of time around credentialing and authentication and user-based kind of access management type use cases, device trust, things like that. Started C1 probably about 5 years ago at this point, really with the vision and the goal of becoming that unified identity control plane for businesses to modernize their identity. And then it just happens, this thing called AI happened, and really expanded the opportunity for us to help customers with a broader set of problems, particularly around AI use cases. So our mission is really to help companies transition to become agentic enterprises. When you look at most companies today, they've got tons of legacy technology, tons of kind of old stacks of identity platforms, and that's fine. But people are trying to adopt AI. They're trying to use AI agents. They're trying to get them deployed into production. They're trying to do it securely. They're trying to enable their employees with access to AI tools and MCPs. And we really don't have a good set of capabilities to help employees and to do that safely and securely in a governed manner. And so that's what C1 does, is we're that control plane to help companies provide humans and AI agents with access, secure access, governed access across all their apps, infrastructure, and data. So we do that with a unified control plane, automation, policy, controls, visibility across their environment in terms of the agents that are being used, and including agent core agents in AWS, and really just give folks that kind of single pane of glass from a visibility perspective, but then also a governance perspective, so that they can actually deploy agents and AI across their environment successfully.
That's awesome. And so, most of our viewers are security practitioners or leaders, but we also have a huge development community as well. So you're working with, and if you're listening to us, thank you very much. Welcome. Please do leave us a question or say hello in the chat. We are live. We do read questions out. So let's make this a three-way chat, Alex, myself, and our audience. So with your experience with customers, I speak to a lot of customers, and the security teams and the leaders they're typically trying to find ways to either enable or cope with and adapt to an organization that's driving to adopt AI and AI agents. So what kind of challenges are you seeing? What are customers talking to you about, and then how are you helping them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting comments about this moment in time is it is a board level discussion to drive AI adoption and transformation internally at businesses. So every single board is pushing on every single executive team to say, how are you adopting AI? How are you transforming your business? How are you becoming more productive? How are you doing more with the same amount of people or incrementally more people, and really driving that radical automation that AI creates an opportunity around, because AI is effectively scaled out intelligence. And so we're seeing, particularly on the security side, the kind of visceral reaction to this is very much like a visibility centric reaction. So just tell me what's going on in my environment. Tell me what I'm using. Tell me what AI tools are being used, what inference models, what agents are being deployed, what people are doing on their endpoints in regards to AI, what MCPs are people using. So there's a huge visibility problem. I think once you get past that, though, and the broader challenge for the security ecosystem is then how do you give teams the tools to actually scale out using this in a governed way and in a secure way. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get stuck at the visibility piece, but a lot of teams are really getting stuck at the productivity, the enablement, the governed path piece. And I think that is always the biggest opportunity, I think, in security is, security teams never really want to be like the teams of no, where they're saying like, no, you can't use this. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do this, because that doesn't really fly at the board level imperative of how are you transforming your business and how are you adopting more AI. What you really have to do on the security side is give teams governed, secure, paved paths for unlocking their use cases, deploying agents, getting AI tools set up, and using them effectively, because that's how you're going to be competitive in the future, right? And that's how you're going to modernize your business and become that agentic enterprise. So those are the two big things that I would say our customers are asking us about is, A, how do we get visibility? Great. Now that we have visibility, how are we actually helping to make our teams more effective and like enabling them to adopt AI more successfully?
That's what we see with a lot of customers in terms of, there's almost like a paradigm that they have to kind of balance. On one side, you've got the business is demanding to innovate, to serve their customers better, to use new tools, and then on the other side, you've got to also manage risk and keep the business secure and compliant. So
That's right.
I think
And
probably,
you can't really trade those off is the problem, especially in the AI
yeah,
world, because things are moving so fast. And
yeah.
it has access. AI has just incredible ability to, you know, ingest context and then make decisions on context, make changes to downstream systems. And so you really need like a good set of guardrails to be able to deploy these systems and agent harnesses and agents in production. And I think we're just like woefully lacking on the tool capabilities today. We have great inference models, great intelligence models, but the surrounding ecosystem to support deploying those things at scale securely is very lacking today.
I think that's the more I talk to security leaders as well within customers and organizations and internally as well. That's the key thing, because the board will want to know, how do I just secure AI? And you can't start from a perspective, how do I secure AI? You need to make sure you have the foundational security, which includes things like data security, data governance, identity is a massive kind of area, and have those nailed down in a scalable fashion. Because the danger is that when the innovation wave comes, it's not going to be IT that are going to be creating a new. There will be agents that IT create, but the real business value is going to come from the users who want to create an agent to help do a task to make their life easier.
That's right. Yeah, because the ground truth on AI adoption is always at the individual employee, right? It's like you can at the executive level, the CIO, CISO, IT team, you can kind of browbeat employees all day long on using more AI tools and adopting it, but at the end of the day, the best thing that you can do is like give them access to tools, capabilities in a secure way, and then see what people do, because you're never going to be able to kind of micromanage individual employees and how they're using tools successfully. Every single function in a business is so different. Your customer success team might end up using AI in a very different way than your engineering team, which is maybe a very different way than your sales team. But ultimately, what you have to do is give people the tooling, like I said, the guardrails, um, to be able to adopt and use these tools, and then just see what they do, and then figure out the best way to kind of productionize those workloads, or make sure that you've got like stability in the business processes and the changes that those teams make. But I think that that's the best way to think about the security role right now in the AI ecosystem, is like really about just like giving people tools and then kind of seeing what they do with it.
Yeah, I agree. We've actually got a question from our viewers as well. So Erie Edits asks, do you think there's a world where people will come to companies with their own AI tools? So kind of like a carpenter has their own hammer. So bring your own tools, kind of democratized kind of environment, and then they can be plugged into a company's internal AI systems, or maybe into a company's data. What are you seeing customers do?
I think that's a super interesting question. I mean, we are seeing that a little bit to a degree across things like, I think some AI kind of patterns are going to be like very transportable across companies. So, how you do skills, for example, or how you think about like running agent loops. But I do think a lot of companies are going to end up, and we've done this internally ourselves, they're going to end up building a lot of bespoke AI infrastructure that powers their business. Um, so for example, we have a software factory in the cloud that we call Squire, and it's a not local dev environment. It's cloud hosted dev environment. You can spin up multiple dev environments. There's a local coding agent in those dev environments. It's tied into our linear stack. So I think you can bring kind of the skills, and the understanding of how AI works there. But I think every company might end up being a little bit bespoke and artisanal in some of their infrastructure. But I do think, if you're a marketer, for example, you're probably going to have a set of skills you use to create content or write blog posts or do product launches. And I think those definitely, kind of like the way that you operationalize agents in the context of your job, I do think is actually going to be like very, very portable. But the factory with which you work in, that might be like a little bit more bespoke to the company. I sort of think of everyone's job as, it's shifting. Like we used to be very kind of hands-on keyboard, and it was all about logging into SaaS systems and applications and doing lots of work. And, your job was about providing intelligence in the context of your work, and like doing that work and then like producing outputs from it. I think the new job is very much, you kind of own like a factory, if you will, of your work, and there's defined inputs and outputs. You've got an enterprise, an organizational brain, if you will, and memory associated with like your organization, your department, yourself as an employee of the company. But your job is to make sure that those inputs and outputs work really well, and that the factory is kind of dialed in and tuning, and is humming really well. So I think some things will be transportable, but I don't know how transportable like infrastructure will be, if that makes sense, across company boundaries.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we've gone through this cycle, I guess, through multiple different other technology and innovation waves. So if you think about things like developers want to use the tools that make them more productive. They have personal favorites. It's typically going to be cloud native tools. So if you ever spoken to your development team and you want them to use a clunky old enterprise, like identity tool, for example, that's not cloud native, they're probably going to have some objections to that, and they're going to be much happier, but also much more productive using the cloud native plugins that they want to use, the cloud native tools that
Yeah,
they want to innovate
that's
with.
right. I mean, I do think one of the interesting shifts here is that uh, I think employees will be a lot more selective about the companies they go to based on the tooling and the infrastructure that the company provides. So I do think that's a bit of a shift too, because if you're thinking about how am I being the most productive person I can for this business that I'm working for, what they're going to want to know is like, what kind of tools and infrastructure do you have around AI? And if you don't have anything, or your answer is like, well, everyone's just, running a local coding harness, and that's like kind of what we give you, maybe that works a little bit, but there's companies that are really going to be able to accelerate by investing in like the tooling and infrastructure that they have, that they provide employees. And people are going to get really excited about that. And if you're looking at multiple different job opportunities, and one is an artisanal company that kind of doesn't really have anything baked, and one's got incredible cloud hosted dev environments with the ability to be like super productive and learn new skills and things like that, I think that's going to be actually like a really big kind of criteria for how people think about companies they want to join.
Yeah, and I think that's, when I talk to customers, and particularly kind of business leaders rather than just technology leaders, they want to unlock innovation, and they want to do that, and they want to, in their words, democratize innovation. So it's not them leading it; it's the people who are closest to the process that you want to, for example, get help with an agent. Those are the people who need to be enabled to build their own tools, to build their own apps, for example, or agents. But also it comes down to model choice as well. If you're one of our founding kind of philosophies is to give customers the choice of models, for example, or a choice of agents, that an environment to build things in, and you can build whatever you like, but that it's in a scalable and a secure platform that you can then manage at scale. So you're not managing the innovation, you're managing the platform. And it's like we have a really good concept that a lot of our customers use, which is frictionless security, or security is easy button. You have a choice in terms of what you use, but there are, and obviously with limits, but there's an easy way, which is a secure way. So make sure that the easy ways, or the securest way, is always the easy route, and don't make a secure option locked down, non-functional, more difficult or slow. It has to be the best way of doing things. This is the kind of challenge we see.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's almost like a maturity curve for companies. There's a lot of companies, frankly, that are stuck in they're still saying no to AI, believe it or not. We talk to sometimes those customers, and they're just trying to figure out how to like get their arms around visibility. Then everyone's on this, hey, we've got engineers using coding harnesses, and it's kind of Wild West, and we don't really know what's going on, but like we're allowing it, but we don't really have good guardrails. And then you've got guardrails and dedicated infrastructure and capabilities to making teams and employees more efficient and effective. And I think, to your point, like one of the key capabilities in the latter one is definitely going to be model agility, and being able to pick different inference models, get access to those for the use case that you're trying to use. And again, that's just about like making sure employees can be as productive as possible and get as much done as they possibly can.
Yeah. So let's talking about this scalable platform, and you're enabling your users to use these tools. What are some of the biggest, I guess, the best practices, and maybe the rabbit holes, or the road humps to avoid, that you see customers hitting when they're adopting agents?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the guardrails piece, I think one of the most important ones is to shift the focus from saying no to saying, how are we enabling teams to, use AI, and let's just take like MCPs, for example. I think, we've just spent the last 10, 15 years trying to get software off of people's endpoints. It's just a bad idea to be running like tons of software that's untrusted on people's endpoints. And then MCPs came along, and now everyone's downloading vibe coded MCPs with supply chain risks and local credentials on their laptops. And it's kind of the Wild West again. It's a really bad idea from a security perspective.
So we should probably just explain to some of our audience what an MCP is. So an MCP it's Model Context Protocol. So it essentially creates kind of a standardized two-way connection between your applications.
Yeah, I think of
So
it as like it's like an API for AI
yeah,
agents. It's like the simplest way to describe it. It's a way for AI agents to talk to different systems and push data and make changes to downstream systems and to pull data and context out. So MCP is a new protocol in the AI ecosystem. It enables agentic access to data and then the ability to read, write, and downstream systems. Like I said, it's kind of an API for AI agents. We're in this wild west right now where there's a sprawl there. Like I said, there because the ability to write software is so cheap these days with coding harnesses. Tons of people have vibe coded MCPs. A lot of third-party systems don't have native ones yet. And so what we've done is we've got a kind of ecosystem where people have tons of downloaded, vibe coded MCPs. Again, there's no supply chain security typically in those. They've got local credentials on their laptop. And so you're in this world where now we've got tons of credentials for downstream systems on laptops with supply chain risks, with if your endpoint gets compromised, they can grab those credentials. It's just like a bad world. So I think a lot of people kind of get stuck, even if we just pulled on that problem in terms of how do you enable people to successfully adopt and deploy MCPs? And so that's one of the problems that we help our customers with our AI access gateway is, third-party MCPs, first-party MCPs, on-prem data systems. How do you kind of connect that up and give, unified access and governance across your environment to AI agents and to employees? Back to your point about the rabbit hole, I think one of the things you can get really stuck on is just not doing anything there or focusing on visibility of it. But really you got to shift to, okay, this is going to happen. Employees are going to use AI tools. They're going to use MCPs. How do we give them a governed path to be able to do that at scale?
Yeah. And I think, going back to the security foundations as well, which is, if you have the security foundations in place, then you can make it scalable. And these are not new concepts. So, if you're creating an agent, for example, then you've got to start thinking about access control, around data security, around permissions. But you want to implement best practice. What you don't necessarily want to do is, this quote comes from a customer, so I don't claim any credit for it. But the quote was, "You have to treat an agent like a toddler."
That's probably right. Yeah.
So you have to give it access to the things it needs to do, but you don't want completely open access to things. You're not going to leave your toddler in a freshly painted room with a box of crayons unsupervised. You have to treat them like humans, but you have to imagine that they're toddlers because they're going to do things that maybe they weren't intended to do. Even with guardrails, so don't give it full access to all the data that you have, or to create actions that are unmonitored or ungoverned. So you kind of need to have more granularity, and also think about things like just-in-time access.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good framing. I sort of think about agents as being untrusted, by default. And toddler, I think, is a good way to describe it, because it is very much untrusted. You wouldn't put a toddler in a room with a bazooka and not monitor them and make sure that everything's going to be okay. And in the same way, you need with AI agents, governance guardrails, the ability to do privilege escalation, but you still need that human in the loop in certain contexts to be able to kind of govern their actions and make sure that what they're trying to do is appropriate. If it's off mission and their intent is to make some changes to production infrastructure or push data into a system, maybe you want a human in the loop for those types of use cases. So you really need those the traditional governance frameworks that you might have for humans, but you need it applied kind of at machine scale and speed. Because otherwise, the sort of framing I like to think about is agents aren't, if they need to escalate permissions, they're not going to create a ticket in your help desk system and then wait 2 weeks for someone to approve a help desk ticket to get access to something so that they can go finish the work that they're doing. That doesn't make sense. So I think a lot of the legacy technology patterns where you had, generally trusted humans doing generally trusted work, using systems that were okay to be a little bit slow and not kind of highly automated was fine in the human world, because again, you had trusted humans, and like you generally expected them to not do like completely stupid things or things that you didn't expect. I think agents really flip that, where they're effectively toddlers. They are untrusted in what they do. They do sometimes go off the script, but you can't use these systems that take a long time, that kind of operate at human speed. Like, you really have to have systems that have built-in policy, built-in automation, built-in guardrails, full audit trails, so that they can operate at machine speed, but in an untrusted way.
Yeah, and I think a comment from Adrian is, he's pretty sure his son might eat the crayons. Hopefully not. But it's one of the things with agents, that you need to know, how it's going to react and have those guardrails in place. So even if it does behave in a way unintended, you have the guardrails in place to make sure that it's not eating the crayons, deleting your data,
Yeah.
sending data maybe somewhere where you didn't expect it to. So yeah, that's let's
Yeah,
hope.
you have to assume like agents are untrusted by default. They're going to do untrusted work by default, and you kind of have to assume that. You should never assume that an agent is going to perform like exactly as you expected, like on script.
Yeah, yeah, and you guys have built an integration as well into Agent Core. Can you talk a little bit about how that's come about and what
Yeah,
it's.
we've actually got a few different AWS centric use cases and capabilities that customers use us for. One is we've got several deep AWS integrations from just an identity governance perspective, so we can manage just in time privilege escalation across AWS infrastructure and access controls across humans or agents getting the correct permissions that they need in an AWS environment to be able to perform the work that they want to do. The second is a deeper agent core integration, where we can actually do kind of discovery and visibility around the agents in those environments. Obviously, we do have a broader set of capabilities around kind of like agent discovery, so that you get that unified kind of control plane, visibility control, if you will, across your environment of what are all of the agents, local coding harnesses, cloud deployed, infrastructure deployed agents within your environment. So you have kind of that single pane of glass to view that.
That's really interesting. And I was going to bring up a question from Jim Huddleston, who's asking exactly that. It's like, what can we do about shadow AI and shadow agents? And I think the first element on that is, getting visibility about what's going on. So it's kind of like, your users are going to want to be productive. They're going to be innovating. So you want to make sure you've got visibility of what's going on.
I think
And then
that's exactly right. Yep.
you can
Yeah,
build.
and we've got a bunch of capabilities there, and even some exciting ones that we're going to be announcing in the next month or so, just before Black Hat. But yeah, that ability to discover. I think enterprise agents are a little bit easier to get your arms around, because typically those are deployed to centralized systems, not just kind of local laptops. They're going to run in Agent Core. They're going to run in other harnesses, and so C1 can give visibility around that. I think shadow AI uses as a kind of relates to like personal employee access is an interesting area, because it's all about what are the inference models they're using in the web, what are they using on their local laptops, what are they using vibe coded MCPs, how do you kind of secure that? And so we've got a bunch of capabilities there as well.
Awesome. So if you if you're listening, you want to find out what agents your organization is using, and you want to get a handle on things like identity and access control and governance for permissions, just in time access, then there's a QR code. Hopefully that side of the window, but maybe it's on
Yeah,
that.
I don't know. It's
Um,
it's here for me, but I don't know if we're on the opposite side of the. Oh, there you
No,
go. Now it's
you're
now it's where
looking
you
at it, I can
pointed.
see.
There you go.
Awesome. So, scan the QR code, go and get a demo from C1, and see what your users are doing, and then how you can help to let them go faster, but safely and from a secure perspective. So, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Alex. Thank you so much. If any of the audience is going to Black Hat is it August?
It is in August. I think it's the first week in August. Yeah.
Yeah. So AWS will be there. Amazing partners like C1 will be there. So come and see us. Have a look at the at C1's demo, and tell us what you're doing with agents as well. We'd love to we'd love to learn more. So we've been Security Live. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rob. Appreciate it. See you.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening. Welcome to AWS Security Live. My name's Rob Hale. I'm your host, and I lead AWS's security partner business in EMEA, joining together various different solutions from our amazing community of partners to solve for customer security challenges. So we broadcast live every 2 weeks. We are taking a small break, so during July we'll have a small break in transmission, but we'll be back. And every episode we speak to a different partner around their security solutions and what they're seeing, what they're helping customers with. So today we have another awesome partner. We have Reid Tatoris. Reid, how are you doing?
Hey, Rob, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
And so, Reid, you're from Chainguard. Tell us about Chainguard. It's a word that a name that I think a lot of customers will have heard of, but may not be super familiar with yet. So give us an overview.
Yeah, really high level, Chainguard makes open source software secure by default. So all of us here are building with JavaScript, Nginx, Python, all kinds of open source tools. And if you're doing that, you're probably spending a ton of time patching, scanning for malware. Chainguard gives you an option to pull pretty much any open source artifact you'd want. Pull it from us. We do all the scanning, all the malware blocking, all the patching for you, so you can build. And most developers really care about the being able to build faster and removing that burden of patching.
Also, it's something that we speak a lot to customers about, whether it's concerns around how do I validate our supply chain from a software perspective, and that's super important. And we were talking about agents and AI on the previous session, and so you had supply chain, and that should be part of your supply chain security areas. But open source is a huge and growing portion of a customer's supply chain. So what are you seeing in terms of trends in terms of customer adoption of open source, and then what challenges does that then open up?
So the biggest one I've seen is the amount of code that we're all writing has exploded. So maybe you're using AI only a little bit, but you're probably writing 3 times more, 10 times more code. And I think the core metric I would look at is the number of PRs that people are pushing has exploded. So if what you were doing is every PR you're scanning and you're analyzing, and then after the fact you're running to try and catch things, your problem just became 10 times worse, right? So if you had to write a patch before, you're now having to write 10 times more patches. And then the second thing we're seeing is that attackers know this. So if your CI pipeline is getting clogged, you've got way more code that's coming out. They're now starting to attack that. So Trivy, I think, is a good example. I'm sure you saw that at the start of the year. Trivy itself wasn't exploited. What happened is they had a GitHub action that was misconfigured. Attackers were really clever. They took branch name was a variable that you could deploy. So they used that branch name to hide a shell script, and that script went and stole a bunch of credentials. So now, if you are a company that was using the Trivy scanner and using the GitHub action, your credentials got stolen, even though the code you wrote yourself, you made no mistakes there. And then since that Trivy attack, I think we had 11 follow-on attacks based on credentials that were stolen. So Last year, if you look at the first half of the year, we had 3 similar attacks and up to like 11. So just the speed at which attackers are hitting open source repos has increased quite a bit.
I think it's something like 6 times the volume of exploits, or a number of exploits against open source repos since last year. So it's massively increasing.
Yeah, and we actually I think we put out today or tomorrow, but if you look at all of the critical vulns that we saw in the past year, 97% of them are not in the top 20 open source libraries. So we're talking like niche projects that probably don't have tens of thousands of maintainers. And you maybe even forgot that you used this one niche project in one particular thing that you pushed out 6 years ago.
That's interesting. So if you expand that out, how many dependencies are there in terms of a code release that a customer might do that maybe they don't know about? Do you have any kind of insight into how large the problem is?
Yeah, I actually don't have a specific number. I know it's huge. The thing that has surprised me since coming to Chainguard is that the number of really old dependencies. So one bank I can remember was using a Java library that was literally 18 years old. And so you think about code that you push and has used for 8 years, no one is scanning that anymore, right? And so what we've seen with AI is that while no one was scanning that before, it's pretty much free now for attackers to go and probe those old code bases. If you look 5 years ago as an attacker, I would look at the most popular libraries, because if I find an exploit, I want to use that across millions of companies, not across 2. But now it's free to send a model against every single project. And so why not scan them all? And so we're seeing more of those niche vulnerabilities pop up.
And so, when I started, I've been in security a long time, like 27, 28 years, showing the grey hair, got the scars to prove it. Those piles of CVEs that, we used to print the things out, and, the pile never got smaller. Obviously, now, the pile would be way too big to print, but we also have a world where we have models like Mythos, for example, and Daybreak, which may not be public access yet, but they're changing the whole landscape in terms of how an attacker might discover exploits, and even the creating an exploit against a vulnerability, and that has reduced the window down from what was probably weeks or maybe months to exploit, now down to potentially hours. So how are you seeing that impacting how an organization has to respond to these in terms of discovery and then mitigation?
Well, one, thank you, because I know we're contractually obligated to say Mythos at least once. So glad you brought it up. Mythos on the one hand has changed things. On the other hand, it's just an extension of a problem we've had to deal with before. So I don't know if you saw a couple weeks ago, we announced Project Athena. So we have a bunch of our customers that have Mythos access. They found tons of vulnerabilities and they needed help patching them. So we started Athena, which is a collective where folks with access to Mythos are writing those exploits to a centralized, secured database, and then we're actually building patches from them. So one, we're talking dozens of partners here, right? We don't have thousands of people with Mythos access. We have found tens of thousands of distinct vulnerabilities, and we've already written over 2,000, I think, patches for those that the customers that have Mythos access are consuming right now in private. The really cool thing, though, is all that work, all those patches that we've built, we have those queued up. So if you happen to be pulling your libraries from Chainguard, the second the Mythos vulnerabilities go public, you automatically pull from us and they automatically become patched. So yeah, it's crazy. And the other interesting thing is, so when this started, I wanted this to be a marketing exercise, right? We all love to joke that like, wow, Anthropic, this is the best marketing I've ever seen. Like our tool is so good, you can't have it, right? The problem is when you look at the actual exploits, they're really complicated. This is not like we found one like offhand line of code in a library that's 20 years old that's no one's updated. These are all, I'm going through 4 different open source projects in conjunction, and the exploit only happens when you hit each of them. We've also seen a bunch where you scan the library itself, no vulnerability detected, until you run it in the sandbox that has all of the combination of the projects that you use. So it's really scary. The good thing here is this really existed, if you think about it, 6 months ago. Like the way that we build open source, all of us have production code that is dependent on a project that someone wrote. Maybe there's 1,000 maintainers, but maybe not. And open source is awesome because it allows us to go 10 times faster than we could otherwise. But it also means that like your critical components are dependent on software that someone else wrote. And so a year ago, we could be a little bit complacent here, right? And now we've had to shift that. So I have seen some of the biggest companies in the world say, okay, we're now going to put time into having a centralized place where we can share all of our vulnerabilities. We're talking about things like having a maintainer of last resort. So if we see a project that doesn't look like it's maintained, who's actually going to write that patch if we find something new? And so there's a couple of conversations we have going about how do we just do open source better in the future.
Yeah, and that's we for the first time, or maybe not the first time, but it's not been this prevalent. The impact of things like Mythos has meant that things like cybersecurity or cyber risk posture, vulnerabilities, they're all things that boards and even supervisory boards are now asking questions around. So you've got things like NIS2, and also you've got the Cyber Resiliency Act as well, and you guys have got stuff in the US as well, so there's an executive order around Mythos. So stakes are higher in terms of regulation. So what can customers do and security teams do in terms of ensuring things like security tool coverage across all of their repos?
So I just dropped a link to the latest EO on AI security. The one thing is it's so vague, right? So how do you look at this and understand what I'm supposed to actually do? I think what you need to do for sure is you need to have a focus on this. But I understand it's really scary because there's a lot of debate in how you could respond to this. The one thing I want to highlight that you brought up at the start of when you talked, we're all scared of Mythos. I am too. Mythos did not invent vulnerabilities. And I think when we talk about this, we often forget this. We've been able to find vulnerabilities that already existed. And so it stinks that they existed, but we were at risk, right? Like we could have been exploited 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We all got really lucky that we haven't been. So like it is tough that we have to do it now, but these are problems that existed. And Mythos is just a forcing function to say, okay, open source world, you've got to deal with it. So then your question, how do you make sure you secure all the tools that you're using? The second thing that has happened, Mythos has found new vulnerabilities, but as we've all started using AI, we now have a whole new set of tools that are also open source that now create a new surface area. So you and Alex were talking about skills. That is the one that makes me the most nervous. We have a secure skills registry that we just put into beta a week ago. But what we found, so we went and looked at several thousand public skills on like Happy Copilot, on Skills SH. 40% of them had critical vulnerabilities. One of the top 15 skills on Skills SH, all it did was install macOS Dealer on your device. Wow. So if you think about open source, like JavaScript, you've had years and tens of thousands of maintainers, and you still get vulnerabilities. Most skills are written by one person. You don't know if they're an attacker. You don't know if they vibe coded the skill. So they don't even have the security of the crowd there. And so skills are a giant mess. So I think recommendation, what would you do is, one, make sure you understand what open source software you're using. Like go and inventory every skill. These are every artifact. These are the containers I'm using. These are the packages I'm using. These are the libraries. These are the skills. These are the open source workflows. And then make sure you have a plan for securing each of those. I brought up Trivy with GitHub Actions. But GitHub Actions, again, have a lot of flaws. And I know huge companies that you're putting a lot of effort into securing like the containers that you deploy. And then once you deploy them, when you are pushing that code live, you use an open source GitHub action like TJ Actions from a few years ago, or Trivy, or Dagger, and like whatever the weakness is in your whole flow, attackers will find them. So I think make sure that every artifact you're using is secure, not just the big ones that you think about.
Yeah, we've got a question from Adrian Murat, which is, it used to be that we could rely on, a 30-day window. I question that in terms of depends on your risk posture and how critical that is. But yeah, you definitely have. It was anticipated that when a vulnerability is publicized, you'd have a window to respond before it's exploited. Now it's dropped to zero, or pretty much zero, with models. How can we actually respond to that? And I think there's two angles to this, and the first is prevention is kind of better than cure when you can. So things like making sure you're pulling from trusted and verified secure repositories and the code there is good is one angle. The other thing is there's the whole agents kind of innovation cycle isn't something that just the bad guys, our adversaries are doing. We're seeing customers and security teams and developers using agents to improve their code quality, but also to respond as well. So when you find a vulnerability, this isn't something you're going to be able to respond with humans with. You can't build a team that can move fast enough to mitigate that. So you're going to be able to actually start to build agents, and we do this at Amazon, and we see successful customers do this, using agents to then help you to respond faster. So, what's the best way to mitigate this? Is it a patch? Is it a compensatory control, for example, in your infrastructure? What else are you seeing customers do in terms of trying to respond to that threat?
So, I mean, you said this, but I really want to hit on this. When your time to exploit is 0 days, like patching just doesn't work. And like we can say that, but that's what everyone does. And I think it's really hard to internalize. But the main mechanism we had that was wait for an exploit, find what it is, put it in your queue, and then go get to it in a couple weeks. Like you cannot do that. You just have to change the process.
Well, actually, and it's just to say, it's not also this. It's not the security team who are putting the patch in place. What does security team do? They create a ticket. They log it with the development team and the application team. They're the ones who are going to have to patch it normally, and that's not going to happen necessarily immediately. I sound like I'm talking from experience here. I am. How does it work?
So I really think you have to internalize that. Like it's not fun, but scanning and patching doesn't work. Listen, obviously I'm biased, but like we build a solution so that you don't have to worry about scanning and patching. We have competitors, you can look at them too. But if your method for responding to vulns is I'm going to find them and patch them later, you are absolutely going to get hit. Just the window you have doesn't work anymore. So one example of this, NIST has their known exploited vulnerabilities list. And earlier this year, we did an analysis of how long we took to patch those, and our time was negative. And so just as an example, if like that's where you need to be, is you need to look at your time to patch and make sure that it's negative, that you get the patch up before the vulnerability happens. And then the other thing you mentioned is like, how do we respond? And I think I want to hit on the fact that I think we often forget that whatever tools attackers get to use, the defenders get to use them too. So when I started my first company, it was a capture replacement. And every, 6 months, year, I'd find like someone has a new program that broke a captcha. And attackers just tend to be first to use the new tools. But all that happens is you take the same tool that they use, and then you use it for response. And so one is you need to make sure if you're worried about cutting edge models, you had better be using cutting edge models to respond. The other thing is that as attacks get faster, if you cannot pull securely so that you're not pulling direct from source, you better at least have defense in depth. So if you have 5 different levels of defense. That makes it 5 times harder for attackers to find a way in. But yeah, I just don't want to sugarcoat it. I think there's no easy answer to that. Is that unfortunately our jobs just got harder, and we have to just really change the way that we used to approach and respond to vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think it's massively about getting on the front foot and using the tools that we have, and we're doing that as well, and our customers are doing that with AWS Security Agent, for example, which is now part of our Continuum suite. So you can get on the front foot and use those same tools. And actually, as a defender, if you're innovating with AI and agents, you probably now have more resources than maybe your adversaries. And so if you have access to Mythos right now, you definitely have more access to tools than the adversary. So I think it's something where you need to be much more proactive, but also use automation and use agents and tools to help you be able to respond where you need to much faster. I think that's super important. What else are customers kind of doing in terms of mitigating risk, and how are you helping them?
So the other thing that I found really interesting in the past 4 months is what is a developer has changed quite a bit. So a year ago, a developer was a developer. Now you've got agents that are checking in code. Do those count as their own developer, or do they use the creds of the developer who ran them?
Yeah.
But the bigger one is, what about the marketing team that's spinning up a POC? Like, that is great, but now you've got even less experienced people that are writing and pushing code. And so one of the things I ask every customer I talk to is, like, what coding tools are you using, and how many, like, what portion of your developers are using them? No one has any idea. So, like, do you actually have an inventory of who's using which tools? And then let's say you're using Copilot, you're using Claude. You absolutely need to have context for those agents. So if Reid from the product team goes and is writing a POC, I might not think that I should be pulling from our code repo that is linking to secure images. So you need to make sure that you give the right context to your agent by default. So whatever coding harness you're using, make sure that ships with skills, with some plugins that ensure anyone who's vibe coding is going to pull where you want them to. So let's say you have a good system in place, you've got golden images, you've convinced all your developers this is the place you're going to pull from, and then you've got a bunch of marketing folks that vibe code and they start pulling, like, direct from JavaScript repos. Well, then you've now opened up this whole new avenue for attack. So I think as a security team, you every day right now are thinking of, how do I convince developers to do the things I want them to? You need to now start thinking, how do I convince non-developers? So that's scary, but the one plus side I've seen is, if you previously wanted developers to change their behavior, that's really hard. You've got to go convince them. Well, now, if you want developers to change their behavior, there is a world where you write a skill, you make sure that's deployed on every instance of Claude, and then Claude says, I'm going to go pull my Java libraries from this source, because I know that you've given me the context that says this is the place I should pull all libraries from. So in some ways, it can actually make the change process of getting internal folks to perform the actions you want them to, it can make that a little bit easier.
So you're effectively reducing your your surface area by making sure your source code is secure, and that, even with vibe coding, less experienced developers, they're still able to code at speed, but you've increased security and reduced your surface area because you're validating the sources.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that your developers generally know what's a good source and what's not a bad source. So they know, if you take a skill as an example, right? Average developer is going to know, okay, this looks like a more secure skill. They're going to scan it before they pull it in. Your folks that are vibe coding have no idea how to evaluate if something's good. So you have to make sure your coding harness is telling them the place to pull from. Otherwise, they're going to just Google and pull from whatever comes up first.
Yeah, and that's the velocity kind of question, is that 5-10 years ago, you might have been pushing, an update every month, maybe longer. You'll have had a security review and assessment that's built into the end of that process. Now your developers are pushing, within potentially hours or minutes and constantly updating. So you've got to have a mechanism that allows you to maintain your security checks and posture that keeps up with your developers. So this is just a continuation of the velocity that we see in application development.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really important is you have to give an alternative. Like you've seen a bunch of security teams that all they do is say no, and then developers get angry. And so,
well, the other thing is that developers will, human nature dictates that they want to get stuff done. So, if you're no
exactly,
they're going to go around you, and that might be with business support if there's enough, opportunity revenue behind that. And that's not a good place from security perspective.
if you go from like earlier this year, light LLM was exploited. If you're a security team and you go to your engineers and say, "Don't pull light LLM," they're going to say, "Are you kidding me? Like I can't get work done." So you need to make sure anytime you want them to not do something, you have to have an easy alternative. So in that case, you could say, "Don't pull light LLM direct. Like here's our Chainguard libraries that are clean. Pull from there." Or like GitHub Actions, when Trivia was exploited, there were customers that said, "Stop using the Trivia action." They said, "Well, what the heck am I supposed to do from scan?" Give them an alternative. Because if you just say no, one, they're not going to listen to you, but two, they're going to, it's going to like hurt your credibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to make sure you have I'm seeing this with skills in particular, because I don't know, I haven't talked to a single customer that has like a vetted skills repo. And some have said, "I've told my teams I don't want them using skills." But if you do that, they're just going to ignore you. So you want to give them some action.
There's some comments and questions from our audience as well. So Manfred says, you have to assume that you're going to have to enforce those checks in a CI/CD pipeline. And absolutely correct. If there's a way that a developer can get something done and they don't think it's going to be a risk, they might not be doing it maliciously, but you need to have those gateways in place, and you need to be able to have some sort of way of mitigating any mistakes or issues that have come up. And another question from Eerie Edits is that. Do you think with all the vibe coders, they're inadvertently creating kind of safe spaces for malware? I think that's an interesting question. I'd probably say that goes back to the question around making sure that your repositories have good quality code in. Because if the easy option is, somebody's used this bit of code before, I'll just reuse it. If you haven't validated that that's still good quality code and secure, then you're just building in more vulnerabilities. What's your thoughts on that, Reid?
Yeah, I think vibe coders are not going to know what a good source and a bad source is, and they're more likely to increase your surface area. And so the way you protect from that is saying, I'm not going to allow any library pull from the open internet. I'm only going to allow pulls from this specific repository that I know is good. It is absolutely going to expand the surface area of attacks.
Yeah, and so it's another really good comment from Victor. Your incident response plan has got to have a methodology around this. So you're absolutely right. Prevention is better than cure. So I guess one of the main things is where do you is there a repository, for example, or some free libraries? This might be a really subtle cue for a QR code to come up. Do you have a repository of free libraries and images that might be available? There may be a QR code appearing in the corner there.
I'm putting this way. So listen, obviously I'm biased, but right now we're running, you can trial all Chainguard libraries for free. So if you're pulling Java, JavaScript, try it out. You can pull direct from us. We also give you 5 free container images. So any 5 images you want, you can pull them. You can start using them today. And then I think the big one is we have an agent skills repository, totally free, one for you to pull our list of, we've now got more than 1,000 agent skills that we have vetted. We've hardened them. We give you a hardening report that tells you what's changes we made. And then you can also use that to host any internal skills you have. So Everyone I've talked to is developers are downloading into their harness manually. They're maybe sharing like 5 different GitHub repos. We have a skills registry, totally free. You can use that to host any internal skills that you want to deploy throughout your org.
Awesome. So there you have it, folks. If you are looking for a validated and free repository, scan the QR code. Use that as a good step up to making sure that you have some good, secure, and quality libraries. But make sure you've got a scalable mechanism built into your development cycle. Reid, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for our audience for all of your questions. We are going to miss you, but we'll hopefully be back very shortly. But thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.